Hi everyone! In this video we're going to start a new chapter, Chapter 17, Carbohydrates. So you might be used to hearing about carbohydrates in regards to diet or your food. You might hear people say, oh, I'm cutting out carbs, or I'm going to eat less carbs, or maybe I'm going to carbo load before my big run today. So carbohydrates really make up a lot of different types of food that we eat. So you could also refer to them as sugars, but they're present in things like bread, honey, cereal, granola, things of that nature. So we're going to, though, look at this at more of a organic chemistry level and look at functional groups that are present in carbohydrates and also how we could use carbohydrates in our bodies. So from more of a scientific view, carbohydrates are polyhydroxyaldehydes or ketones, or substances that yield such compounds upon hydrolysis. All right, so let's step through that a little bit because there are a lot of big words there. So carbohydrates are polyhydroxy, so that means that there are multiple hydroxy groups or OH groups. And down below, you can see an example of a carbohydrate called ribose. And you'll notice that there are multiple hydroxy groups in that molecule. So carbohydrates are polyhydroxyaldehydes or ketones. So in ribose down below, at the very top, we have an aldehyde. However, other carbohydrates might have a ketone there instead. So you could have an aldehyde or a ketone at the top. The other definition for carbohydrates is substances that yield such compounds upon hydrolysis. So this could be something where if you add water, hydrolysis, it might break a molecule apart into these simpler polyhydroxyaldehydes or ketones. But we'll look at some of those later on. Now, we can classify carbohydrates according to their size. So we could classify them as monosaccharide, disaccharide, or polysaccharide. There's also another term, oligosaccharide, which is more specific. So monosaccharides are single polyhydroxyaldehydes or ketone units. So that would be similar to ribose that we saw on the last slide. It's just one molecule just by itself. A disaccharide, though, would be composed of two monosaccharide units. So down below you can see we have just a little sphere representing our monosaccharide. If we have two of those monosaccharides bonded together, we call that a disaccharide. Now, this could be an example of something that we could add water to and break it apart, and then it would become two monosaccharides. So that is also considered a carbohydrate. Now, oligosaccharides are a chain that contains 3 to 10 units. So 3 to 10 monosaccharides that are joined together. So that's a very specific range. And then polysaccharides are very long chains of monosaccharide units. So you could have possibly hundreds or thousands of units in a polysaccharide. So we'll talk about examples of each of these. So down below, I have, again, ribose, which is a monosaccharide. Now, this monosaccharide can actually also exist in a cyclic form. So right now it's shown in what's called a straight chain form or open chain form. But we'll talk about later how this can kind of curl in on itself and form a ring structure, similar to what we can see in our second example of sucrose. So in sucrose, this is a disaccharide. So it has two units or two monosaccharides joined together. So we have one on the top in its cyclic form and one on the bottom, also in its cyclic form. And the connection point is right here in blue. And then off to the right, we have our polysaccharide example. So here we have multiple units in their cyclic forms that are all bound together. And this keeps going too. Notice that it doesn't end. So this is just one portion of a polysaccharide. Now let's talk about why carbohydrates are important. So carbohydrates can provide energy through their oxidation. So we've talked about oxidation before, and we've said that when something is oxidized, it's gaining bonds to oxygen. So maybe a single bond becomes a double bond to oxygen, or we gain actual oxygen atoms through oxidation. Oxidation could also refer to the loss of hydrogen atoms as well. Carbohydrates also can supply carbon for the synthesis of cell components. So our bodies contain many different cells, and we need carbon in order to make those cells. So that comes from carbohydrates. Carbohydrates can also serve as a stored form of chemical energy. So if you eat carbs, carbohydrates, or sugar, that can provide you with energy throughout the day. And of course, there's some debate about how healthy that is, because there's healthier forms of carbohydrates, but that's for another class. And then carbohydrates can also form a part of the structural elements of some cells and tissues. And this also can apply to, for instance, plants and other animals, not necessarily just humans. Now, a couple of terms that we're going to start using in this class. Biomolecule. So this is a general term referring to organic compounds that are essential to life. And biochemistry, which is a study of the compounds and processes associated with living organisms. So chemistry and biology are very tightly connected. A lot of what happens in biology has to do with how functional groups interact with each other, or how molecules interact with each other. And we can also refer to the compounds in those processes as biomolecules if they are a part of the biological system. Okay, so this was just a bit of an intro to carbohydrates. In the next lecture, we're going to talk about the different structural aspects of carbohydrates, called stereochemistry. So I will see you then.